welcome everyone to our webinar today entitled Empowering Your Customers to Step into Healthier Homes with Allison and Jeffrey Sauls. Thank you for coming today. I'm Amy Belay, Vice President of Contractor Success at Pearl Certification, and I'm pleased to be hosting this webinar in partnership with the Building Performance Association. We're both passionate about providing valuable insights and information to help you grow your business and to thrive in the new world we find ourselves in. A couple of housekeeping items. Everyone is muted given the number of attendees. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature located in the middle of the toolbar on Zoom. I'll be managing the questions, and our presenters will get to as many as possible at the end of the conversation. We are recording the webinar in addition to streaming it live on Facebook, and we'll share the recording and the slides as soon as we can, usually in a couple of days after the webinar. You're welcome to use the chat box throughout. It is being monitored. However, I ask that any questions for the presenters use the Q&A function. And with that, we'll move us into the presentation. So before I introduce our presenters, just a little bit about Pearl in case you don't know. Pearl certifies the high-performing energy features of a home so that they can be valued at the time of sale or refinance. We work with an elite group of contractors who certify their installs of HVAC, solar, and home performance. We've partnered with the National Association of Realtors, the Department of Energy, Energy Star, and the Appraisal Institute. Our contractor partners report on average between a 5 and 15% increase in close rates because of their partnership with Pearl Certification. If you'd like to learn more, my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And about our sponsors. So the Building Performance Association is a member-driven trade association that's built on 3 decades of experience. It's well-positioned to provide industry support through advocacy, education, networking, publications, and communities. It's a 10,000 membership organization that of professionals that deliver energy efficiency, health, and building performance to people in their homes across the United States. There will be contact information for the Building Performance Association at the end of our presentation. Right, a little bit about our presenters, and then I'm going to have Allison and Jeffrey introduce themselves. Allison is the founder of Energy Vanguard, a company that does residential HVAC design, building science consulting, and training and quality assurance. Allison is very active in Passive House and a member of ASHRAE, and he has the distinct honor of having taught me my very first HERS rating course many, many years ago. And Jeffrey Sauls is an experienced building science professional who provides training and manages the day-to-day operations of Energy Vanguard. Now, with that, I will turn it over to Jeffrey. Sorry, Allison.
Jeffrey, Alice. Oh, all right. Whew, okay, I'm a little bit nervous. Amy told me we've got 2.5 million people on this webinar, and I've never spoken in front of 2.5 million people before, so whew. Let's go. So we're going to talk about home performance contracting in the age of the coronavirus. And before we get to the details of coronavirus, I want to talk about some of just the standard healthy homes things that we need to be aware of. So let's look at the big picture of healthy homes here. Next slide, please. I forgot I got to ask for that. This is a great quote from a guy who's known as the father of toxicology, who's was nicknamed Paracelsus. His real name is like 5 names, and I don't remember all of them, but one of them is Bombastus, which is, I thought, a great name. I think he should have just gone by Bombastus instead of Paracelsus, but anyway, this quote is great. It's basically saying that anything can be toxic to you if you get too much of it. Well, not anything, but that's sort of what it's saying. But a lot of things can be toxic, and it's just a matter of knowing, how much is too much. So next slide. The let's look at some of those things that can be toxic to people. And one is particulate matter. So this is a big one. This is the little particles that float around in the air. And you may have heard of PM 2.5. That's the big one. The larger particles than about 2.5 microns. Micron is 10 to the minus 6 meter, a millionth of a meter. So it's pretty darn small. And those are bad because they can get all the way down into the lungs. The larger particles get caught in your nose and your throat and your mouth before they make it to the lungs. The small ones get swept right down into the lungs, and they can get into the bloodstream, and they can do a lot more damage than the big ones that get filtered out early. The next one, secondhand smoke from cigarettes. If you got this in the home, that can be a big toxin. And next would be nitrogen dioxide, which comes from combustion. So ventless or unvented fireplaces in a house, gas fireplaces, can put a lot of that in the air. The next one is carbon monoxide. We all know about that. Combustion safety is a big deal in home performance. The next one is ozone. And ozone, we're gonna say more about ozone later on, because with all the focus on indoor air quality lately, there are devices out there that generate ozone. There are some people who think that that's a good thing. The research says otherwise. Putting ozone in the air that you breathe is generally not a good thing. It's an irritant. It can cause health problems. So we don't want ozone in the air that we breathe. We want ozone up in the stratosphere, where it prevents ultraviolet or the high energy ultraviolet, UVC, from making it down to the surface of the earth, because it's very damaging to people. The next one is VOCs, which is not actually one, it's a whole bunch of different things. And volatile organic compounds, these are things that off gas from materials in the house, from oriented strand board and the particle board in cabinets and furniture and all kinds of things in the house. Anything that you smell, there's a volatile organic compound there. That new car smell is volatile organic compounds. And the next one is mold. Of course, we know about mold. Home performance contractors deal with this issue a lot because it's related to moisture, not controlling the moisture. When you control the moisture, the mold generally goes away. After that, we have allergens, which this is, well, there's a lot of different sources of allergens. One is outdoor air. When plants are doing their thing and putting lots of allergens into the outdoor air, if we don't have an airtight house, they get into the house and they can cause problems. So that's another indoor air pollutant that's common. And then we've got radon, which is, speaking of that quote by Paracelsus, so anything can be a toxin, it can be a poison, and we just need to know what that level is. And the EPA says that for radon, it's 4 picocuries per liter. If the concentration of radon in the indoor air is 4 picocuries per liter or higher, then you've got a problem. So that might lead you to think that, well, okay, 3.9 picocuries per liter is safe, right? Well, no. I mean, the EPA had to draw a line somewhere, and sometimes that line is based on what's reasonable to achieve. So that's where the line is. It does not mean that anything below that level is safe. So bioeffluents, including carbon dioxide, and these things can build up in the house. Carbon dioxide, of course, is often used as a metric to gauge the indoor air quality, because if the carbon dioxide level gets too high, the carbon dioxide by itself can affect our thinking and our energy level. So keeping it generally below 1,000 parts per million is where we want to be with carbon dioxide. And the last one on the list is the one that we're going to be focusing on later in the presentation here. So viruses, and these things can float around in the air, as we all know very well over the last few months. And that's how they spread from one person to another. They come out of one person and go to another. So we'll talk about that in more detail later. But now let's look at some of the ways that we can affect the indoor air quality. So and these aren't necessarily in order, but air tightness is huge. It affects indoor air quality. It affects comfort. It affects all kinds of things. It affects durability because lots of water vapor can move with it and get into a wall and rot it out. So air tightness is really important from a healthy homes perspective. So we've got, you can see there, that's the blower door in my kitchen, which is sitting right behind me. I'm sitting in that same kitchen. Look at that. Hey, how come I'm not in that other picture? Huh. Well, so air tightness, how much do I want to go into this? Let's move on to the next slide. So the next one is moisture control, and arguably this one should be first because liquid water can damage a house faster than any other thing. Gus Handegord, the famous building scientist from Canada, once said, the three biggest problems with buildings are water, water, and water. Now, usually we don't have as much water as this house has. This is the house of a friend of mine in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. And his house was completely destroyed. He had to tear it down, and he has since built a new house. But that's a big one, is water. Next, source control. So if we have things in the house that we can get rid of, like secondhand smoke, of course, that's an easy one to eliminate. Just make people smoke outside and not near the intake for the ventilation system when they're outside. That's kind of important too. So the next slide shows that the first thing, the way we can think about that is just don't do stupid things. And then think about all the stuff that you bring into a house. Can you bring in low or no VOC materials? And then you got to think about the SVOCs, the semi-volatile organic compounds, which are slower to come out and may last a longer time. So source control is really important. After that, we've got air filtration. Next slide. This one we're going to talk more about too, because that turns out to be a big deal with the coronavirus. Air filtration can be done really well, and we can have good indoor air quality in homes by filtering the air properly. We'll talk in more detail about that, but I've written a number of articles about this topic, and I have actually implemented those ideas in the third-party HVAC designs that we do, as well as in our office and in my house. That picture that you see is a Merv 13 filter in the ceiling return filter grill in my house, one of the 3 filter grills in my house. And I just replaced the filters the other day and measured the pressure drops across them. With high Merv filters, so Merv is a rating from ASHRAE, based on an ASHRAE standard. Higher Merv is better. The scale goes up to 16. The standard 1-inch fiberglass filter is Merv 2. And the filter you see there, the pleated fabric filters are generally higher Merv. This one's a Merv 13 that you see there. And it's pleated, so it gives it more surface area. And to make this work, you've got to make sure that you size the filter large enough that you don't get a big pressure drop across it. And in this case, the filter that you see there had a pressure drop across it, I think, of 0.08, which is below what ACCA recommends for pressure drop across filters of 0.1, and it's pretty good for a Merv 13 filter. Next slide. The other big thing is mechanical ventilation. We want fresh air in a house. We can do that with local ventilation with controls, our bath fans and our range hood, or we can have special devices used for whole house mechanical ventilation. Here's an ERV showing outdoor air coming in one side, going through the capillary core, the red lines, the red arrows. The blue arrows show the indoor air being pulled out of the house, going through the capillary core, and then sent to the outdoors. And those two airstreams pass by each other. They don't mix. In an ERV, they exchange heat and moisture. In an HRV, a heat recovery ventilator, they exchange heat only, not moisture. And most of the time, for most climates, an ERV is the way you want to go because it exchanges the moisture. In a dry climate, if you have an HRV, it can dry things out too much. In a cold climate, it can dry things out too much. In a humid climate, it can bring in that outdoor humidity in summer. So you generally want an ERV instead of an HRV, although there are some milder climates, like the Pacific Northwest is generally ideal for HRVs, but most other places, ERVs are the way to go. Next is pressure balancing. So another thing that can affect indoor air quality is the zonal pressure differences inside a house. When you close a bedroom door, if you only have a supply vent in that bedroom, you can be building up pressure there, and that can create problems. So you can do that with dedicated returns. You can do that with jumper ducts. You can do that with transfer grills. And in this case, that is a return air pathway called the Perfect Balance, I think, that Tamarack sells. That was in the condo that I lived in until last year. I had installed those on our bedroom doors, the 40-year-old, well, it's now a 50-year-old condo. And one of the bedrooms, the worst bedroom, had a pressure difference of 6 pascals before I put that in, and it was down to about 1 pascal with that return air pathway in. All right, next slide. So what we've been focusing on so far is general indoor air quality issues. And now let's look at the broader scope. These are the in the Healthy Homes Evaluator course, and I think this came from the Housing and Urban Development Department, HUD. There are, I think that's where it came from. There are 7, what I call the keep it commands. So the first one is keep it dry. Moisture is probably the most important thing to control. As Gus Handegord said, the 3 biggest problems in buildings are water, water, and water. We got to keep things dry. Moisture problems create indoor air quality problems. They create durability problems. They are not good. So you got to control the moisture. Next is keep it clean. When you let things get dirty, things can get into the air, things can get onto your hands and into your body. So keeping it clean, we've learned a lot about surfaces and surface contamination recently. So keeping things clean is important too. And then next one is keep it pest free. Pests can create problems. They generally are associated with moisture problems. So that's another reason to keep the house dry. They can spread disease and make things dirty, so keep it pest-free. Next is keep it safe. This is a general healthy homes thing. Falls are one of the biggest things that make homes unhealthy. So looking for fall trip hazards and things like that, and electrical problems that could cause somebody to get zapped. Next, we have keep it contaminant free. There's all kinds of toxic things that we use, that we bring into our homes, and maybe we can find something else. If we do have to use those things, find ways to keep them from getting in places where they shouldn't be, clean up after you use them, run ventilation when you're using them, things like that. Keep it ventilated. Speaking of ventilation, that's another important one. And the last one is keep it maintained. When the house starts being not as well maintained, ventilation systems don't work, things start getting wet, and you can get all these problems coming back again. So these are the 7 keep it commands. And now let's go into, well, just a reminder, the house is a system. All these things work together. Remember, when you make a change in one area, you've got to watch out for unintended consequences. So, all right, let's get into the COVID-19 part of the story here. All right, so let's talk about how coronavirus spreads. We're not going to talk too much about this. I'm not an epidemiologist, and I don't play one on TV or the internet. But coronavirus spreads mainly by person to person via the big droplets. So when you're within a few feet of somebody and they're talking, like I'm talking now, there's probably droplets coming out. Maybe if I get the light behind me, you can see them. The big droplets are generally the biggest problem because they can contain more virus particles. So that's the biggest problem. And here's a picture of somebody with the backlighting of a sneeze. That's this, and you've probably seen this in real life too. And you don't think about this much, although we've all been thinking about it the last few months, I guess. The big droplets are the biggest problem. So next, let's not look at that slide too long. So there are other ways of spreading the disease, but they're not quite as likely. So less likely, number one, would be the small droplets. And there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on this. So this is my understanding today, and I don't follow this as closely as some people do. But my understanding is the big droplets are the biggest problem. Small droplets can be, but probably not as much. The difference between the big droplets and the small droplets, besides size, is that the big droplets fall to the ground pretty quickly. Within a few feet, they fall out of the air because they're big enough, and they're going to stick to the floor, to the countertops, to the chair, the different surfaces within the range of where they can fall. And the small droplets, though, can be in the size of the 2.5 micron particulate matter that we talked about. So if we got things that are just a micron or two big, they can float around in the air for a long time. And if they're floating around in the air for a long time, somebody across the room or in a different room may breathe them in. So we don't want to do that, but we don't know how much of a factor that is. It seems like they're not as big as a factor as we thought. Some people may have thought earlier. They definitely don't seem to be as big a factor as the big droplets. Surfaces, likewise, there's a huge emphasis on this early on. Be careful about what you touch, but it seems like the researchers are saying now surfaces aren't quite as important as they thought early on. Still, as a contractor, when you go into houses, you have to act like surfaces are a big deal because we just don't know enough. I mean, you want to disinfect and be careful with surfaces because we don't want to have anybody thinking that we're going to be spreading stuff in their house by touching things and not disinfecting properly. Another way that it does not spread, and this doesn't really relate to home performance contracting so much, but I found this interesting when I was reading about this. Kissing can spread coronavirus, but sex evidently, at least right now, the thinking is does not. So wear a mask, I guess. Another less likely means of spreading coronavirus, which does relate to home performance contractors, is air conditioning systems. Now this became a big issue a few months ago. Well, I don't know when it came out, but so there was a study that came out of South Korea, and the New York Times wrote about this. This is how most people know about it here. The New York Times wrote this article about a restaurant in China where one person was sick, and they're in a small restaurant. 9 other people left there having the coronavirus afterwards. The story said that the one person that was sick was sitting by this vent that was blowing the air across the room, and that blew it right into the other people in the room, and so 9 other people got sick from the air currents blowing this into them. It turns out that the thinking now, and there's another journal article coming out about this, a scientific article, that it's not through the peer review system yet, but apparently news of it is out, and their claim is that it was not the air currents, it was the lack of ventilation, because that one sick person was in this restaurant breathing over and over for whatever amount of time that they were in there, and there was no ventilation. So all the air that was in that restaurant was staying in there, everybody ended up breathing that air. That one person kept breathing out virus particles, and everybody in the restaurant is breathing that same air over and over. So it was just the recirculation of air in there, the constant volume of air not changing with outside air was the problem there. All right. So what is a home performance contractor to do? Now, we know all this stuff general about home performance contracting and healthy homes. We know a little bit about coronavirus now. So what should we do? One of the things, before we go into ventilation, I wanted to say that I'm not going to go into this part. I don't even have a slide on it, but of course, you want to do all the CDC recommended stuff. Have your workers wear masks, preferably have the people in the home not there while you're working, disinfect things, all that standard stuff. So when you're talking to clients or potential clients about indoor air quality and coronavirus and healthy homes, one of the big things is ventilation. So for coronavirus, that restaurant that I just talked about, the problem was lack of ventilation. So ventilation is one of the biggest things you can do for helping people be safe in their homes if there's any fear of coronavirus getting into their house. Just flushing the house with air can do a lot. So this is one thing you can do if you're going to a house to do work. A temporary thing you can do is set up a blower door. Even if you're not going to do a blower door test, you can set up a blower door and you can flush the house. It takes 2, 3, 4 minutes to flush all the air out of that house, and then you have fresh air in there, outdoor air anyway, and you have removed all or most of anything that was floating around in the air. So that's one thing you can do when you're in the house to work. But as a contractor, you can talk to your clients or potential clients about improving their ventilation systems. You can talk to them about using the ventilation systems they already have. They have bath fans and range hoods, for example. Turn those on and use them. And this, most of the time, the people are there by themselves. So if they've been there by themselves for a while, it's less of a need. But if they go out and come back and they've had contact with somebody, run the ventilation. It's not just wash your hands when you get home, run the ventilation system when you get home. And when you have other people over, if that happens, run the ventilation system. If workers come into their house, if you can tell them after your crew leaves, run the ventilation system, run the fans, run the exhaust fans and the range hood. That's what they can do with local ventilation that already is there. If they have mechanical ventilation, whole house ventilation, the next thing would be to crank it up. If they don't have a whole house system, talk to them about putting one in. Whole house ventilation is a great thing, and even in houses that are leaky. I mean, now that we're facing this coronavirus issue, mechanical ventilation isn't just for tight houses. Mechanical ventilation can help leaky houses as well, because a leaky house doesn't leak all the time. It's dependent on the 3 things that drive infiltration or air leakage, and those are wind, stack effect, and mechanical systems. Well, we can turn the fans on, like I just talked about, the exhaust fans, if and that'll do something. But if you're relying on stack effect and wind, well, you may not have much wind, and spring and fall, you're not going to have much stack effect. In summer, you're not going to have as much stack effect as in winter. So whole house mechanical ventilation can help with that air exchange throughout the year. And if you have one that you can crank up to get more ventilation, then that's good too. The next thing is filtration. So we talked about that a little bit already, and what you need to get good filtration. You need, let's see. So let's go to the next slide. Amy. So the first item on this list for filtration is high Merv filters. High Merv filters. So Merv is a rating system from ASHRAE. It's an ASHRAE standard. And the higher the Merv, the more particles it catches, but it also ranks the particles by size. And what you want to catch are well, for coronavirus, you want to catch all the particles, but the big particles are probably not going to make it to the return to go through the filter. The small particles will. And the point where you start getting really good filtration of the small particles is Merv 13, which is why I have Merv 13 in my house. At Merv 13, you're catching 85% of the smallest particles, which are 3 microns and smaller. The 1 to 3 micron particles, you're catching 85% of those. Merv 14, I think, is 90% of those. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up. But the higher the Merv, the more all the particles you're catching, including the small ones. ASHRAE now is recommending Merv 14 for coronavirus. Right after I bought a case of Merv 13, they recommend Merv 14. So, oh well. Merv 13 is good enough for me anyway. But you have to be careful, because if you put a Merv 13 or Merv 14 filter in a system that can't handle it, you can seriously cut down on the airflow. And you guys are contractors, you probably know this already, especially those of you who do HVAC. So make sure that your system can handle it. You can try the system as is with a higher Merv filter and measure the pressure drop and see what it's like. And remember, the pressure drop that you measure when the filter is clean is not going to be the same as the pressure drop that you get after the filter has been there for a while and starts getting dirty. There's a rule of thumb about sizing filters that we use in our design practice, and that is for be able to put in a good high Merv filter, you want about 2 square feet of filter area. That's just length times width, not counting the pleats, but the length times width. You want about 2 square feet of that per 400 CFM of airflow. So 2 square feet per ton of capacity, because 400 CFM is nominal.
Hey, Allison, something you and I talked about a little bit, and it probably is important for this group of contractors, is what are the potential risks for changing filters if you're out, helping a homeowner, service a system and take that out? Is there any risk there for them?
Yes, and that's a great question. One of the reasons that I don't like washable filters is because it puts you in contact with all that stuff you've been capturing on the filter. The best thing to do with a dirty filter is, well, nowadays in the age of coronavirus, wear a mask when you're changing it. If you suspect there's any possibility of coronavirus on it. We don't know how long the coronavirus can survive on a filter. And you don't know when it was captured, when you're pulling it off of there. The last layer of dirt may have had a bunch on there. So you probably want to wear a mask or a respirator to change the filter, put it in a plastic bag and seal it up and get it out of the house. And be careful with that, because in addition to virus particles, it's probably got other toxic stuff on there. And not only that, there's interactions that happen on the filter because you're putting all these different things together, and there are chemical interactions that happen with the different things that you're collecting on the filter. There are biological interactions that happen. Things can start growing on the filter. So filters are nasty. Just be careful with them. All right, here's another one that's been a big topic lately, UV lights. A lot of HVAC contractors are out there trying to sell UV lights as the cure to coronavirus. And so I wrote an article about this a month or so ago. Turns out, yes, UV lights can help. They can kill viruses. They can kill other things. And their best use in an HVAC system is keeping the coil clean and the drain pan for the air conditioner. There's a lot of stuff that can get on there and start growing, the biofilms, the slime that gets on the coil and in the pan. So the UV lights can will constantly expose that and kill them. UV lights are, so there's 3 bands of ultraviolet light that we typically talk about: UVA, UVB, and UVC. UVA is the closest to visible light, so it's the longest wavelength UV, the lowest energy, and UVB is the next higher energy, and UVC is the highest energy. UVC is completely filtered out from sunlight before it gets to the earth because we have ozone in the stratosphere. UV light is what kills viruses and other pathogens, and it also can hurt humans. So we don't want to be exposed to UVC. So when these things are set up, there's different ways of using UV lights. In hospitals and other healthcare facilities, they'll set these up to treat the air at the top of a room. They'll put the UV lights to hit that upper layer of air, and so that kills pathogens that get up there through air circulation that is able to treat a lot of the air in the room. And you can treat the the coils and drain pans in the HVAC system. It can also treat the air moving through the system. That's a little bit harder to do because the air is moving through quickly. So you can certainly do it, but you've got to have enough power on the lights, and it needs to be engineered properly if that's your goal. So I would say focus on ventilation and filtration before UV lights. UV lights can certainly help keep the coil and pan clean. For coronavirus, you may be overselling it if you sell it for that, if you try to do that. All right, next slide. Oh, yes, not next slide, next point. The very important point here. So when these lights create, and these are mercury vapor lights, and when the mercury vapor emits the ultraviolet in the UVC range, it usually creates ozone, unless it's in a special kind of bulb which filters out the one wavelength, the one band of wavelengths that creates the ozone. So you want to get the right kind of UV light that does not create ozone. If you look at the at the product info, it should say if it is made not to generate ozone. If it's not made to not generate ozone, a little tricky there, then it probably won't say anything. So make sure you get one that says, and I should have put that in here, but if you look at I've got a link to my article about this at the end of the presentation. If you look at that, there are some companies out there selling UV lights, and they have a little symbol that says validated ozone free. They are tested. I think there's an Intertech or UL test that they go through, and that's the kind of UV light that you should be installing if you're going to go that route. All right. So other air cleaners. There's all kinds of stuff out there. There's little portable air cleaners, and there's stuff that you can install in the ducts. So there's, some of them are just filtration, some are UV, some are photocatalytic oxidation, and electronic air cleaners. There's a bunch of stuff out there. The bottom line is they may help, but with the portable air cleaners, you're not moving a whole lot of air. So what I think their best use is for is if you have somebody in the house who's sick, somebody who's got coronavirus or some other kind of virus that could be spread. If they stay in one room and you put a portable air cleaner or two in there and put it on as high a level as possible, make sure that it doesn't generate ozone, because there are others that generate ozone in addition to UV lights. Put that on high and keep the room closed, and that'll circulate and help treat the air in that room. If you try to do a whole house with a portable air cleaner, you're probably going to need several of them, and that can run into a lot of money. it's best use, I think, is for somebody who's already sick and they're confined to one room of the house. Again, watch out for ozone generation, and I've got some links on the resources. The EPA has some really good documents about this. I'll point them out when we get to the resources. So last thing to point out about this, in general, home is the safest place to be because you're there, you're isolated, unless you have a lot of, it depends on the house, but if there's a lot of people coming and going in the house, and let's say somebody works at a grocery store or a hospital, then you'll have to be more careful. But for people who are working from home, that's generally the safest place. Well, I mean, even for people who aren't working from home, once they get home, home is probably the safest place they spend their time, because the grocery store or the hospital, it's not going to be as safe. So, and just a nice quote from Florence Nightingale, who was the person who created the modern nursing industry. Connection between health and the dwelling of the population is one of the most important that exists. So, healthy homes. And next we've got, I think here's where the resources are. So yeah, here's a couple of articles that I've written. So, can your HVAC system filter out coronavirus? And do UV lamps really improve indoor air quality? The HVAC system filtering out coronavirus article also has links to my articles about filtering and how to do high Merv filtration without killing your airflow. And so there's other stuff in there. And there's links to other articles in the UV article as well. So, next one, ASHRAE is a great resource. They've got this page right here, ashrae.org, technical resources/resources. It doesn't say COVID-19 or coronavirus in there, but as far as I could tell, it's just coronavirus information. And they have a link for residential buildings. They have a reputation for being focused mainly on commercial, but they do focus on residential as well. And there's a page on there for residential, some good resources. EPA has good resources on coronavirus. Of course, CDC, I didn't feel like I need to put that in there. The EPA has a page on air cleaners as well, and that's a good resource. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some, oh, no, go back, sorry. So the EPA air cleaners resources, there's two documents in particular on there. One is a shorter one, I think it's about 12 pages. It's more general, consumer-friendly document about different types of air cleaners and what they can and can't do for you. Then there's a longer one called the technical summary, which is really good. And it's 74 pages long. It's got, they cover all kinds of air cleaners, the UV lights, high Merv filters, photocatalytic oxidation, electronic air cleaners, just about everything you could think of is in there. And they talk about the good and the bad and what to watch out for and all that stuff. So really good resources there. And then the last couple of resources I have here, these are a couple of people in academia. Jeffrey Siegel, if you don't know him, he's at the University of Toronto. He's done a lot of really good work in indoor air quality, and lately he's been focused on filtration. So he's a perfect person to look up for coronavirus information about filtration. If I couldn't find a specific page about him, but if you search his name, Jeff Siegel or Jeffrey Siegel, and then put the word filter there, or search his name plus coronavirus, you'll get some good resources. He was interviewed on the indoor air quality show that comes, radio show that comes on every Friday at noon, and there's some good, really good information in there. Plus, if you search his name and then those two terms, you'll find lots of good information. Shelley Miller is another indoor air quality researcher. She's at the University of Colorado, and she's been doing a lot of posting about this as well lately. So those are some really good resources for you. I think that's all I've got.
Yeah, there's the last slide is the contact information, which I'll put up at the end. It looks like we've got a good 15 minutes for some questions. And we do have a few that have come in. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A feature, and just that way we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. So a question, there's actually a few people have asked this question. What is your opinion on running a blower door for weatherization during the pandemic?
Great question. The Building Performance Association is going to be putting out a statement about this, and I reviewed it the other day. I don't know what the final form of it's going to be, but it's probably going to say something like, we know that ventilation is good for coronavirus, and a blower door can ventilate the house at a very high rate. So running a blower door is really good. And even if you're not there to do a blower door test, you might want to set up the blower door just to flush the house, like I mentioned earlier, because that can do a lot to clean the air in the house. So in general, blower door testing is still a good thing.
But as a general rule, don't stand in front of the fan and take deep breaths.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the precautions about wearing a mask and stuff like that. Yep.
The next question is, how is the higher MERV rating impacting the static pressure and airflow?
Well, higher MERV filters are meant to capture more stuff. So they're generally thicker, they're thicker, and they slow the air down more, so you need more area. So that rule of thumb that I gave, 2 square feet per 400 CFM of airflow, will help keep the pressure drop within reason. Keep it low.
Do they need to be changed more often? Is that what's recommended with respect to the coronavirus outbreak?
Well, if you can't get the amount of area that you need, like 2 square feet per 400 CFM, then yeah, they're going to have to be changed more often, because the stuff will build up quicker on them. If you size them properly, let's say 2 square feet per ton, then they can probably last 6 months or more. The one thing you can do to check that is measure the pressure drop across them. And if you're starting off, let's say at 0.08, so my filters, I've got 2 filters that are about 0.08 and one's at 0.07 inches of water column is the unit I'm using there. And when they get to about 0.15, or well, probably not that much, but when they get to about 0.12, so I'll keep an eye on the pressure drop across them. And I've got the holes drilled, so I can easily go up there with my manometer and measure the pressure drop. I also, I bought some little Magna Helix gauges to install, so I could just go up in my attic anytime and see what the pressure drop across the filter is and how it changes. So,
how do you, if you were a typical homeowner, which you are not, how do you give guidance to a customer on something like that?
Guidance to a customer
like,
on
as to the frequency of when to change their filter.
Well, so there's you can look at the filter. If it looks really, really dirty, like really nasty dirty, you can go ahead and change it. Even you might want to change it a little before then, but I just changed. So I got the system put in last November, and I had Merv 8 filters there first, and they were in for about 7 months. I pulled them down, and they looked dirty on the surface, but I held them up to the window, and the light came right through. So they could have lasted probably another 6 months. It depends on a number of things, how much stuff is floating around in the air in the house and where the filter is located. If you put filters on the floor, if you get return floor grills, they're going to get dirty fast. You're going to have to change them frequently. If the lower they are in the room, the more frequently they're going to have to be changed, probably. So, I mean, for a typical homeowner, you could just look at the filter, and when it gets dirty, then you could change it, or you could buy a little gauge, do what I'm doing, and install a permanent magnehelic gauge. They're about $40.
There's another question similar to the blower door question. Do you have any opinion or concern that running the blower door would drop particles from the surfaces or raise their level in the air?
Draw particles from the surfaces. I have not heard anything about that. I think it's mostly going to just remove the stuff that's in the air.
Assuming
Jeffrey,
you're pressurizing the house.
I haven't heard that either. And our, along with some of the other viruses, isn't the virus droplets typically are moist, right? And they're going to stick to surfaces a little more readily than, say, dust that would be. And obviously, you know, the caution that we all have around vermiculite and things like that, and asbestos, we have to be careful about disturbing. But I think I have not heard of anything.
Okay. Yeah. Well, even if they do get disturbed, I mean, let's say you've got a countertop in the airstream making its way to the blower door, and somebody sneezed on that countertop 2 days ago, and then, you know, maybe the virus particles can stay alive for 3 days. So maybe they're still alive, maybe it's dried out, maybe they come up. Well, where are they going? They're going right out the blower door. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
Okay. Another question, I'm trying to paraphrase, it's a long question. What are some considerations in evaluating service providers so that I can have confidence that I'm getting the real deal when hiring a professional air quality assessor?
Air quality what?
Assessor.
Assessor.
Yeah.
Well, if they're a Pearl contractor or a member of BPA, those are two things I would look for first. There's also other associations, the Indoor Air Quality Association, and there's probably some certifications as well, but I'm not that familiar with them.
I know as a consumer, I've always appreciated different businesses that have put out YouTube videos explaining the precautions and what they're doing to make you feel safe in your homes. As a contractor, you know, having a philosophy similar to, if you're familiar with hiking, you know, pack it in, pack it out, you know, anything you're taking into someone's home, make sure that you're taking it with you so you don't, you know, the customer is not concerned with what you're bringing in.
That's a good point. And I'll just point out that BPI has the Healthy Home Evaluator credential that's worth looking out for as well. What's a good strategy for high Merv filtration with Minisplits?
Well, that's what I'm doing. So Minisplits come in different varieties. I have ducted Minisplits in my house, and I've got Merv 13 filters on them. I got rid of the filter that came with it and just put in standard return filter grills. Ductless Minisplits, you can't do that with, so you're going to have to do some kind of other filtration, standalone filter.
Yeah,
and oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, and hopefully, you know, if you have ducted Minisplits, you have a separate mechanical ventilation system as well, which you can improve the filter there. Do
high Merv filters impregnated with charcoal add any value to the air filtration?
Yeah, charcoal they don't add value for virus removal, from what I understand, but they're more for removing odors and things like that.
Okay. Are filters at every return better than one filter at the return plenum?
I think so, because number one, if you put the filters where all the return grills are, then you keep your return ducts clean. If your filter is at the unit, all the dirt that gets sucked into the return is going all the way through the return ducts until it hits the filter. So you've got dirty ducts then. And if you put them at the return grills, if you have more than one grill, then it's easy to get the area that you need, the 2 square feet per ton I talked about.
Awesome. Someone wants to know if you're still offering training, Allison.
Any training?
Mm-hmm.
Not well, not right now. We're in the process of putting some stuff together.
I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, and we still, let me mention though, as a plug for us, I mean, we still are a BPI test center, and we do customized trainings still on a regular basis, but we don't have a training calendar, if you will, like we all saw back in the mid 2000s there, late 2000s.
Yep.
How hard or expensive is it to add whole house ventilation to an existing 2,000 square foot, 3 to 4 bedroom home?
Well, how hard? It depends on the house. It depends on the house. I mean, if you've got a basement or a crawl space, especially a nice encapsulated crawl space, that you can put something in and get some ductwork run around, then that could work. Or if you got an attic, you can put it in the attic. If it's a vented attic, you've got to be careful with duct insulation and all that. But it's less of a hit on a ventilation system because the temperature differences aren't as big. But yeah, I mean, you can certainly do it. I mean, I've got an existing home, and I just put in the ducted mini splits. I haven't put a ventilation system in, whole house ventilation system in yet, but that's going to be coming up before too long.
But I add to that too, is we want to make sure that the ventilation system is appropriate for your climate. I mean, I know it's easiest just to plug in a continuous running exhaust fan, but that may not be the right way to go depending on your client or your climate. We had multiple days with 70-degree dew points last week here in Atlanta, and if you're just doing exhaust only ventilation, you're bringing in that moist air through the wall cavities and those holes, and that can be dangerous where there's high humid climates.
Another question: when faced with work scopes that require PPE that cannot be readily sourced, how do you suggest proceeding?
I didn't catch the first part of that. When faced with what?
Work scopes that require PPE that cannot be readily sourced.
Jeffrey?
You're muted.
No, no, I've gone through that same struggle trying to find appropriate materials. It's my understanding is it's certainly outside of the big box stores. I know it's hard to find there, and you have to be willing to look at a number of places. I think the building supply houses tend to be more readily supplied than others. Certainly, if you don't have a connection there or relationship, do that. That's where it seems that most people are having the big success of getting all the equipment needed.
Oh, and I did get an email from Energy Federation, EFI.org recently. They are selling some PPE. I don't know if they have what you're looking for, but that's a possibility. EFI.org.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeffrey and Allison, for answering all those questions. We're right at time now. I'd like to thank the panelists, Jeffrey and Allison, for your time and attention and expertise, and to our participants, our attendees, for all of your great questions. We'll be following up with a recording of the webinar in the next couple of days, and we will include a PDF of the slides, assuming, Allison, you're comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. And just a note, this is Allison and Jeffrey's contact information. If you're interested in learning more about Pearl, you can see my information there, and Katie at the Building Performance Association, our gracious sponsor for this webinar, is also listed there. Pearl is continuing to build out its webinar series, and June being Healthy Homes Month, we have another great one next week with Larry Zarker from BPI, Joe Madosh from Hayward Score, and Kevin Kennedy, that I'm really excited, and I'm going to be wrangling that conversation, which should be a lot of fun. And I also want to just make a plug that Allison was gracious enough to write a guest blog post for Pearl. I strongly recommend you go check it out. It was just posted yesterday. very relevant to today's conversation. I really appreciate you doing that for us, Allison.
Oh, you're welcome.
And yeah, with that, thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you guys again soon.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. It was great.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
take care.